The diagnosis came on Emma's 5th birthday. Instead of celebrating with cake and presents, I sat in Dr. Martinez's office, staring at scans of my daughter's heart while he explained terms like congenital defect and immediate surgical intervention. My perfect little girl, who loved ballet and finger painting, needed open heart surgery to survive. I'm Rachel Anderson, but I was born Rachel Mitchell. At 30, I found myself facing every parent's nightmare while dealing with a stepmother who saw my daughter's medical crisis as an inconvenience to her social calendar. Victoria had married my father 3 years ago, after my mother passed away from breast cancer. She brought with her an impressive medical pedigree, chief surgeon at Anderson Medical Center, one of Boston's most prestigious private hospitals. The irony that my daughter's life-threatening condition would expose Victoria's true nature wasn't lost on me. Surgery? Victoria's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her designer coffee mug when I broke the news at Sunday brunch. At Boston Children's, why not bring her to Anderson Medical? We have an excellent pediatric unit. Dr. Martinez is the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country, I explained. He's pioneered this specific procedure. Martinez? Victoria's lips curled slightly. One of those public hospital doctors? Really, Rachel, you need to think about appearances. The Anderson name carries weight in medical circles. I caught my father's eye across the table, hoping for support, but he just stirred his coffee uncomfortably. Since marrying Victoria, he'd become increasingly passive, letting her dominate every family decision. This isn't about appearances, I said firmly. It's about giving Emma the best chance. Victoria sighed dramatically. And the cost? These experimental procedures aren't cheap. Have you considered more practical options? Practical options, my voice cracked. This is my daughter's life. Of course, dear, but let's be realistic. A single mother, working as an elementary school teacher, and Emma's condition will require lifelong care. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions about resource allocation. The words hit me like physical blows. I looked at my father again, but he was suddenly very interested in his phone. The same man who'd once moved heaven and earth to get my mother experimental cancer treatments was now silent while his wife suggested my daughter wasn't worth saving. I have savings, I said, and the insurance will cover most of it. Victoria's smile was cold. Ah yes, the insurance your father generously keeps you on through his company. But premiums are rising, and with the Anderson Medical Center's expansion plans, I left brunch early that day, holding Emma's small hand as we walked to the car. She was wearing her favorite ballet shoes, still hoping to dance in next month's recital. Mommy, she asked, why doesn't Grandma Victoria want me to get better? The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The cost was staggering, $275,000 after insurance. I'd emptied my savings and taken a loan against my house, but was still short. When I swallowed my pride and asked my father for help, Victoria intervened. We'd love to help, of course, she said, her voice dripping false sympathy. But we've just committed substantial funds to the new pediatric wing at Anderson Medical. Perhaps you could start a GoFundMe, though that might impact the family's reputation. That night, after tucking Emma into bed, I found myself going through old family papers in my mother's study. Mom had been meticulous about documentation, keeping everything organized in clearly labeled files. I was looking for information about selling her old jewelry when I found something unexpected. A folder marked Anderson Medical Center, original ownership. My hands trembled as I read through the documents. The prestigious hospital Victoria was so proud of. It had originally belonged to my mother's family. My grandfather had founded it, naming it after my mother, Andrea Anderson. He'd apparently sold it years ago to a medical group. But these papers suggested something wasn't quite right about that transaction. Further digging revealed more surprises. My mother's final letter to me, which I'd been too grief-stricken to open after her death, contained a USB drive and a note. For when you need it most. The truth about Anderson Medical Center. I plugged the drive into my laptop and my mother's face appeared on screen. She looked tired, clearly recording this in her final days, but her eyes were sharp. Rachel, sweetheart, she began. If you're watching this, it means you've discovered the truth about the hospital. Your grandfather didn't sell it. It was stolen through fraud. The proof is all here, along with evidence of decades of financial misconduct. I was gathering evidence to expose everything when I got sick. She paused, coughing slightly. I'm leaving this to you because I trust you to use it wisely. The hospital's current management, including that ambitious surgeon, Victoria Miller, who's been sniffing around your father, they're all implicated. Use this information carefully, my brave girl. I stayed up all night reviewing the files. Tax fraud, insurance scams, falsified medical trials. Victoria and her colleagues had built their prestigious reputation on a foundation of lies. And now they were planning a major expansion, funded partly by the insurance premiums they kept raising on policies like mine. The next morning, as I drove Emma to her pre-op appointment, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Family meeting tonight. Time to discuss practical alternatives to this surgery nonsense. I looked in the rearview mirror at my daughter, singing along to Frozen songs, her chest scar from the cardiac catheterization barely visible under her princess dress. Victoria thought Emma's life could be measured in dollars and cents, weighed against her precious hospital's reputation. Time to show her how wrong she was. The Anderson Medical Center's executive conference room looked exactly as pretentious as you'd expect. All mahogany panels and leather chairs, with portraits of distinguished board members lining the walls. My grandfather's photo was conspicuously absent, though he built this place from nothing. Victoria had arranged quite the audience for what she thought would be my surrender. The hospital's board of directors, her key allies in the administration, even my father's financial advisor. She sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, wearing a white designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Rachel dear, she began, her voice dripping artificial concern. We're all here to help you make the right decision about Emma's situation. I placed my laptop and a thick folder of documents on the table. Yes, we are. Just not the decision you're expecting. Victoria's perfect smile flickered slightly. Now, I know you're emotional about this, with the financial realities. Let's talk about financial realities, I interrupted, opening my laptop. Like the real ownership of Anderson Medical Center, or should I say, the Anderson Mitchell Medical Center, as it was originally named. The room went silent. Victoria's smile vanished completely. I don't know what you're talking about, she said sharply. This meeting is about Emma's surgery. This meeting, I continued calmly, is about fraud, embezzlement, and theft. Would anyone like to see my grandfather's original incorporation documents? Or perhaps the evidence of how his partnership was systematically stolen through forged paperwork while he battled dementia? I began distributing copies of my mother's carefully gathered evidence. My mother spent her final months documenting everything. The falsified medical trials, the insurance fraud, the offshore accounts where you've been hiding profits that should have gone to patient care. Victoria tried to snatch the papers, but board members were already reading, their faces growing pale. These allegations are ridiculous, she sputtered. Your mother was sick, delusional. My mother, I said quietly, was a certified forensic accountant who specialized in medical fraud. Would you like to see her final report, the one she was preparing for the FBI before her cancer diagnosis? I pressed play on my laptop and my mother's voice filled the room. The recording detailed years of systematic fraud, naming names and citing specific transactions. Victoria's face grew increasingly ashen as her crimes were laid bare. Of course, I added, this is just the beginning. The FBI would be very interested in your recent expansion plans, especially how you've been funding them by denying coverage for life-saving procedures while padding executive bonuses. You wouldn't dare, Victoria hissed. Think about your father's reputation. My father. I turned to him, seeing him clearly for the first time since my mother's death. Dad, did you know what she was doing? Did you know she was using your company's insurance policies to help fund her fraud? He looked stunned, shaking his head slowly. The premium increases, the denied claims. You said it was normal market adjustment. Oh, it was adjusted all right, I said, pulling out more documents. Adjusted to funnel money into Victoria's private accounts, including the money that should have covered Emma's surgery. One of the board members, Dr. Harrison, stood up abruptly. Mrs. Miller, is this true? Have you been manipulating coverage decisions for personal gain? Victoria's composure cracked entirely. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations. This hospital's reputation was built by my grandfather's hard work, I finished. Not your fraud. I laid out my terms clearly. The hospital would cover Emma's surgery at Boston Children's. All of it, not just the insurance portion. Victoria would resign immediately, and the board would cooperate fully with a federal investigation into the fraud. And if we refuse? Victoria asked, but her voice had lost its authority. Then I sent everything to the FBI, the medical board, and every news outlet in Boston. How's that for the hospital's reputation? The vote was unanimous. Victoria was out, effective immediately. The board, desperate to avoid a public scandal, agreed to all my conditions and more, establishing a charitable foundation in my grandfather's name to help families who couldn't afford critical care. My father, finally shaking off years of Victoria's influence, broke down and apologized. I've been a coward, he admitted. Your mother would be so ashamed of me. Mom knew about Victoria's plans, I told him gently. She left me the evidence because she knew someday I'd need it, not just for myself, but for Emma, and for every other patient Victoria saw as a profit center rather than a person. Victoria left the hospital that day in disgrace. Last I heard, she'd moved to Florida. Apparently, that's where disgraced medical executives go to retire. She tried to write me a letter of apology, but it was really just more manipulation, ending with a request to testify on her behalf when the federal charges came down. I donated the letter to Boston Children's Hospital's ethics training program. Emma's surgery was a success. Dr. Martinez did an amazing job, and watching her dance at her recital 3 months later, you'd never know she had open-heart surgery. The scar on her chest is fading, but she calls it her warrior mark, proof that she's stronger than anyone knew. The Anderson Mitchell Medical Center, renamed to honor both my grandfather and mother, is different now. The new board has implemented strict ethical guidelines, and the charitable foundation helps dozens of families access life-saving care every year. Yesterday, I found Emma in my mother's old study, looking at the family photos on the wall. "Mommy," she asked, "did Grandma Andrea help make me better?" I thought about my mother's courage in gathering evidence even while battling cancer, about her foresight in saving it for when it would be needed most. "Yes, baby," I said, hugging her close. Grandma Andrea helped make a lot of people better. The portrait wall in the hospital's main lobby has changed. Victoria's photo is gone, replaced by one of my grandfather with my mother as a child, standing in front of the original clinic. Below it hangs a plaque with the hospital's new mission statement: "Every life has value beyond measure." It's exactly what my mother would have wanted. Late at night, when Emma's asleep and the house is quiet, I sometimes sit in my mother's study and read through her files. Not the evidence of fraud and corruption, but her personal notes about why she fought so hard to expose the truth. "Healthcare isn't about profits," she wrote. "It's about people. Every time we let money override mercy, we lose a piece of our humanity." Emma has her next checkup tomorrow. We'll drive past Anderson Medical Center on our way to Boston Children's, and she'll wave at the building like she always does. She doesn't know the full story yet, about Victoria's cruelty, about my mother's evidence, about the battle fought over her right to live. Someday I'll tell her everything, but for now, I'm content knowing that my mother's legacy lives on, not just in the renamed hospital or the families helped by the foundation, but in every beat of my daughter's mended heart.